I would like to go to the next speaker, Dr. Senay at the University of Minnesota, and she's going to present on big data, data privacy, and plant and animal disease research. Take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. It's really great being here and seeing all this really interesting presentations. My name is Senait. I'm a research associate at the James Center at the University of Minnesota. I'm also an adjunct assistant professor at the plant pathology department. I'm here to speak a little bit on data privacy and issues that impact plant and animal disease research. My co-authors, Dr. Sherson from the Department of Animal Science, Dr. Cardona from College of Veterinary Medicine, and Dr. Sylvester from the Minnesota Supercomputing Institute, and a colleague from GEMS. This is not we're not presenting results, or unlike some of the other presentations, this is not an already done work, but we really would like to thank the organizers for inviting us to discuss plant data privacy issues that specifically impact, so that we can discuss these issues that impact plant and animal disease research. This is something that we on and off discuss that we need to look at. So we would like to take this opportunity, because now we have a reason to come up with something solid. But these are areas that we've been separately working on or discussing on and off. So how I would frame it would be to discuss the specific issues for plant and animal disease research and what is being done in terms of dealing with these issues at the James Center. So I would like to apologize earlier if some of the examples are more on the plant pest and diseases side, heavy on that side. On the paper we'll discuss more and include, because I work in that area, include more examples in terms of the examples given about the research societies and consortia. But I will go through the presentation and you'll see what I mean. Okay. So as I discussed earlier, sorry, this is covering my view. So as I discussed earlier, big data, data sharing, in general, data privacy issues with animal disease and plant and animal disease research is not that different from issues that we face from other agricultural related research, but specific areas that push the use of big data this disease research include the increased trade and transportation. Trade, transportation, and tourism mean increased incidences of diseases, as well as pests that are vectors of plant and animal diseases. This in general mean that the bigger need to share data across the globe, within between different researchers. The other major issue is the need for biosecurity, a bigger biosecurity network around the world, and regional networks. Organizations like the EPO, the European Plant Protection Organization, the North American Plant Protection Organization. We have the EFSA, the European Food Safety Association, and the Food and Drug Association here, agency here in the US. So all these, as these traits become more and more serious, then there's more and more data needed for decision making as well. Another issue that is driving the need for the use of big data, data sharing and collaboration in this area is the actual, so this is of course cyclical. The problem is causing the methods to become more advanced, and that by itself will lead to epidemiological models that need a higher volume of spatial and temporally explicit data. So that in turn derives the need for the use of big data within this research area. Of course, this doesn't come without its challenges. There are various challenges that probably are common with other areas of research as well. Data come from different data sources, so you require a platform or a media that will be able to standardize that. Different data formats. Data quality becomes a problem because each lab or each project collects data based on their own based on their own standards and based on their own the level of accuracy as well. So that becomes a problem in terms of bringing these data sets together and employing them in a larger research context. There is also issues with data sharing and storage systems, and we know that there are a lot of platforms nowadays for big data is really a buzzword, and then there are the systems to go with it as well, but it doesn't mean that not everyone has access to such platforms, or it doesn't mean that all platforms cater to all kinds of data formats. For example, with plant and animal disease research, more often it's becoming more and more special. The need is for special or temporarily explicit data sets, just because of the need for spatially explicit results for better prediction in terms of disease coverage, intensity, or rate of spread. And that would mean that the necessary the platforms that to go with it need to be equipped and in visualizing and being able to analyze spatial data or highly temporal data set as well. Lack of standardization, I already discussed that. Data authenticity is a specific problem in this area because of biosecurity. This is a big problem as biosecurity measures tend to penalize those areas that might be a source for disease spread or infections. There is less kind of incentive for sharing data, so there might be some data tampering to remove locations that might be sources of threat. And of course, to stay within topic today, what I'll be talking about is data privacy. So data privacy is another big issue for other reasons that previous earlier presenters discussed, but specifically due to biosecurity as well. So just to quickly compare what we're dealing with. So public health information is, for example, here in the USA, protected by the HIPAA Act. But when we really compare the kind of data we're dealing with ag data, you can see that farmers field with precision agriculture is really, the equivalent is going down to a level of a household, especially for this farmer level information that we take. This is specific information about the profile of that specific farm, what might be, the potentials and what is underneath in terms of from its soil, vertically up to, weather information. So the whole depth of information collected at that specific individually owned property would be at risk when these data sets become converged and shared across the system. Another is information like the household surveys, the LSMS, ISA in Africa, for example, and the NAS surveys here in the US. Very specific geo-reference data on that could reveal personal information. And then when we look at genomic data, like field trials, breeders information, and all this is millions of dollars being spent on developing varieties. And of course, there is a concern that competitors can get hold of the data. There is a concern that years of research could just go down the drain because a number of previous speaker mentioned that a lot of R&D is being covered by the private sector nowadays, and this is data that they protect due to investment reasons as well. So really, if when we compare, except the fact that and in part the target are humans, science, but except the fact that we're looking at individual human data, really the concern for data privacy is clearly shown that, and it's needed for ag data as well. So in response to this specific, this is what I meant earlier when I started my talk. Some of the examples are on plant heavy, but the paper will have balanced examples. But so there have been some work in terms of building trust and building data sharing platforms that could help pest risk, disease researchers. So for example, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, the Global Invasive Species Database, so a number of them, the World Animal Health Information Database. So this kind of makes it easy to share data among researchers, and there are even research groups being set up to govern maybe sharing these data sets or to come up with some kind of community of practice among researchers. I've heard that someone from Global Burden of Animal Disease was presenting earlier. This is a new initiative that's led by CABI, the Global Burden of Crop Loss. So a similar initiative for crop loss. So in general, we are in the right track coming up with data sharing platforms, these databases, and coming up with the human aspect of it as well, research groups being set up to manage this. But this in general is kind of helpful on the publicly sharing on publicly owned data, but it doesn't help much when it comes to actually opening up data that is held by, held privately for various reasons. And sometimes in this area, the biggest value could be not sharing the data, especially if it is specifically if we look at it in terms of what biosecurity measures, how it could impact. For example, it could get a commodity be banned from being traded for a certain location. So when you look at when you weigh the trade-off, so there are times, unless there is a specific or a pathway in which this data can safely be shared for research purposes without repercussions, the data owner might choose to actually hoard it because there's a bigger value in not sharing it and maybe using it just for their own purposes. So to that effect, today what I'll be presenting would be some of the areas or a couple of slides on how at GEMS Center, so we were trying to alleviate this problem, but also what we plan to what we propose between my co-authors to institute in this platform going forward to further alleviate this data privacy problem. So GEMS is an innovative agroinformatics data discovery and analysis platform. The link will be provided there in the slide, and I will be sharing it afterwards. It enables the co-analysis of large and diverse data sets from various fields, mainly genomic, environmental management, and then socioeconomic data. This is what we collectively label GYE by M by S. So it is a big system and platform that caters to a number of different disciplines and in different research areas, but I'm just really quickly picking relevant features for plant and animal disease research. So it constitutes 7 ontologies and 8 descriptive metadata is employed to standardize these multi-source data sets. So that means whenever data is deposited, it goes through a very stringent steps in which data is described. So you would use ontologies or descriptors from other standardized systems, and it's only you're recommended to only use your own term if those terms don't exist anymore. So this is huge in terms of, and later on for the practice would propose later, you would see its advantage. This is huge in terms of already bringing a number of data sets together. It solves the problem halfway already, because then you can compare apples with apples. You know what other project means compared to your project when they label their data. So it has built-in data cleaning routines, so that already increases data quality from when you co-analyze data from different data sources. And whenever data is specially or temporarily tagged, then those are standardized so that you can query over space and time. And of course, it also, one of the most important things is that it gives data owner controlled data access. So just really looking at some of the aspects that are really interesting for pest risk researchers or disease researchers in this area. On the technical aspects, you can restrict access, you can give different levels of access, and it allows secure transfer. And of course, for people in computer sciences and in the big data area, you can use any number of protocols, any number of systems, and you can easily do this. But for researchers, for domain researchers, to have all this in one platform, it's a big deal, because you don't waste time to try and solve this data sharing problems, because it's all in one place. In terms of legal considerations, this is probably something very unique to GEMS. So there is a legislation that's put in place so that it can keep data within the platform private. So if you'd like, it won't be fiable. So it's that is an extra comfort or an extra peace of mind for private data owners that would safely want to share their data for the greater good, or maybe because it impacts their cause as well, but then without fear of it being used for purposes other than what they intended to do to be. So this is a lovely slide that I borrowed from Dr. Ben Lynch, a colleague from GEMS. So this is one of the solutions. So these are things that are employed in within GEMS, but which I picked out could also be used as a way of increasing data privacy or dealing with data privacy issues. So federation as a means to deal with data privacy issues. So because GEMS allows federating at different locations, if that it gives total access to the data owner. So your data will not be sent anywhere. It will be completely sitting at your own hub, but you may choose to share metadata, and then from there on you can open a separate line of discussion on how to share on the terms to share your data. For example, there's already a federated hub at the Stellenbosch University in South Africa, but we're also planning having one in Ethiopia at the Ethiopian Institute of Agricultural Research. So there are different incentives for having this. One is not having a very good telecom infrastructure in your country, so you cannot always port data to your country, and sometimes it's because you have a very closed policy system within that country, and so it's not easy to share data. In case of Ethiopia, it's both. So this is another way where you can really deal with data privacy issues in this area. So of course, the other very obvious method is, of course, to when you have to really remove data and you can't share personal information, then you have to de-identify data. So in case of a special data sets, you can remove specific place names or names. These are things that can't be integrated either as a microservice or with a major platform within the GEMS itself. Obfuscating features from being identified. So this could be, fuzzing or aggregating data, jittering of data, special data, using different scales or moving data specially. So these are things that are probably necessary or needed to do if we want a portion of the data set open for research. So what the other thing that we want to discuss here is the major area that we wanted to share with you is argumenting the value of the identified data. So there is a level, there is some kind of distance that you go where trust works and you share everything, but then no amount of trust sometimes could enable you to get data like complete raw data, and that is when you're involved with personal data information, or it could be genomic information, privately owned data. So there may be a time when you always have to absolutely work with the identified or deterred data. So in cases like that, there is always a trade-off between the level of success of the identifying data, but at the same time also giving valuable information for the researcher. So this is just a really quick example so this is a paper by Silanuka and Takuria. So this is just really showing how you would move up points, for example, spatially. The red is the original point and the green is, it could be anywhere around the perimeter, or it could be randomly around the data, or it could be some band of some values that you can use a category to move that data. So we can do something like this. This is work we've done with the Brahma method stink bug environment or niche of the pest itself. So there is this occurrence data. This is thousands of points. It's just because it's global data that you can see it. But some of, as an example, some of this data comes from individual homes and private farms. So if you're to obfuscate this data, there is a difference between just randomly pointing those points, randomly placing them, or you can also look at the profile, the different covariates, and a profile of different environmental variables that are co-located with these points, and look at some kind of niche, and then you can locate that data. In this case, it could be a pest incidence or a disease incidence within a similar environmental area. So chance so that they don't base their information on a wrongly placed geospatial data. So this is kind of a tool, so that this is at a conceptual level. Am I still on? My connection says
you dropped off for a little bit, but we're over time. I don't know if you could wrap up real
okay, yeah. So last two slides. So by doing this, what you would do is you'd still give valuable information even if the actual data point is moved. This is another very quick example by Tinsley. So what happens is, this is a foot and mouth disease research. So it's an epidemiological model. So the data they got is de-identified and spatially moved. So what happens is they overlay the use of land cover layers, so that the gray area is where they expect farms, and the greener areas are where they expect farms. It's a location within the UK, and the gray areas areas they don't think where the FMED comes from. So it doesn't matter for the researcher if it's a specific information. What matters is the data is placed in the right epidemiological zone, so that when you restart the dispersal model, you know that you've started it from the right kind of epidemiological zone, and that has a huge impact on the result, on the rate of spread, and the final disease coverage itself. So providing these additional tools within the platform would mean that even with de-identified data, we can increase the value of the identified data, which is a win-win situation where the data owner is protected, but at the same time the researcher could have valuable information. So I can jump this. This is really about how increased incidences affect, biosecurity measures. They're more and more becoming risk averse, so economists are being hurt. And because of that, people are not sharing data. So biosecurity measures are being taken based on partial data. So this is where we propose the use of secure data sharing protocols like blockchain, where researchers can safely access this data, but not necessarily share them with government agencies. Thank you. Sorry for taking longer.
Thank you, Senat. I think we have time for one question. Dave, is there a question?
Okay. Can researchers and data managers accurately judge the risks associated with their human subjects in other countries? For example, knowledge of local or regional risks may not be shared or known with all the decision makers.
That is a really good question, and I think that's why that's where those groups or consortia or research groups come in handy. There is a group that compares this pest risk profiles and takes out surveys across different experts from different regions. So the human aspect, that collaboration is very important in that aspect, because you can't just really judge from the data, especially for subjectively rated data sets.
Okay. Are the routines for, sorry.
No, I was gonna say, go ahead. I'm arranging the breakout room, so why don't you just continue questions until I'm ready.
Okay, regarding the built-in data cleaning routines to maintain quality, are those routines open source and publicly documented? The concern here is that many researchers prefer raw, unadulterated data, and they prefer to do the cleaning themselves. Okay.
So I'm happy because Kevin Sylvester, my co-author, is here. He is. Are you here, Kevin? But generally, so this the way the data cleaning works, it doesn't affect your raw data. It gives you it saves the original data and gives you a version. Everything is transparent, as in the code being public. What I think there's going to be a community of practice around this, but I think it's proprietary. Kevin, do you want to jump in?
Sonny's exactly correct. Basically, users have complete control over how they clean it. There are guidelines and documentation, and there's always a link to the raw data, so it's raw data is always preserved.
All right. Could you talk about the ontologies that you're using in GEMS?
Kevin,
I guess either of you.
Talk about the descriptive metadata. So they're the column level ontologies. Kevin will say a little bit about it, but we also employ about 7 metadata descriptive, metadata standards. So that would mean at the dataset level, in terms of spatial, temporal variables, who owns the data, who collected the data, all the higher level information is also collected across 7 different metadata descriptors, so we can govern the GEMS data dimensions. But on the ontologies, Kevin.
Yes, the ontologies, basically there's 8 internationally accepted ontologies, including the agronomy ontology, including the plant ontology, proteome, and various others that are accepted by an international community. Bioversity is leading a lot of that. And there's 2 international vocabularies, the AgriVoc and the ICASA vocabulary sets.
Thank you. Well, that's the questions that were sent to me directly.